Welcome, one and all, to a heartwarming tale of an orphan girl who finds her place in a small town full of kindness, where the bonds of community lead her down an unexpected path to happiness and family. Enjoy watching. Sarah looked at the tiny old house. Yes, it was far from a mansion, but she was insanely grateful for it. After leaving the orphanage, she had been shuffled around from office to office for nearly 3 years, before finally being given a place to live. It was fortunate that the orphanage doesn't abandon its own. That's how she had lived, staying with one family, then another. When they told her there was only a house available in a small town, Sarah initially protested. But the bureaucrat, smirking slyly, told her that if she wasn't satisfied, she'd have to wait another year or two. Sarah agreed. No problem, people live in small towns too. Maybe it would even be easier there. The young woman resolutely opened the door, went inside, and sneezed. Yes, thick layers of dust covered everything, but there was one decent upside. The house was partially furnished. Rolling up her sleeves, she began cleaning. Not even half an hour later, there was a knock at the door. Sarah called out a frightened, "Yes!" Of course, she wasn't expecting anyone. At the threshold stood a woman of about 45, smiling warmly. "Hello there. I was wondering who was tending to the abandoned house." Sarah smiled back. "Well, they gave it to me since I'm an orphan." The woman frowned. "How's that? It's barely habitable." "Oh, what a world we live in. I'm Ruby J. Grimes, or just Aunt Ruby." The woman stepped forward, looking around. "How will you live here? It's a total nightmare." Sarah shrugged. "Well, I don't have much choice, so I'll gradually clear out, and repair things." "Yes, repair. You know what? You keep at it for now, and I'll rally my family. Together we'll get this done faster." Sarah tried to stop Ruby. She said she could do it slowly herself since she had no money to pay anyone. At the mention of money, Ruby paused. "Let's get one thing straight. I'll only let that slide this once. And that's only because you haven't seen real life yet. In our small town, we're one big family. So don't even bring up money. Here, people are open. If they want to help, they offer help. If they want to sell, they say so. Got it?" Sarah nodded. "Yes." "Good girl. But you still haven't told me your name." "Sarah." "Nice name. Okay, we'll be back soon." Ruby disappeared through the door as swiftly as she had arrived. Sarah even blinked a few times to understand that this was really happening, and then she smiled. She felt so lighthearted. Very soon, the door opened again without knocking. "Meet my husband, Mike. He'll see what needs fixing around here. And this is my daughter, Anna, and this is Sarah. She'll be our new neighbor." Sarah loved her new neighbors right away. Ruby was one of a kind. Her quiet, large husband obediently listened to his wife. And overall, they were like a loving family straight out of a heartwarming story. A real, loving family. That evening, Anna set the table, while Ruby and Sarah aired out the rooms. After inspecting the house, Ruby said, "Well, there's still a lot of work to do here, but it's livable now." Sarah nodded happily. What she saw now was incomparable to the state of the house when she had arrived. Anna had brought over some pretty little napkins and towels, making Sarah's new home feel cozy. They had dinner together. Ruby talked about the town's residents and how plentiful the local berries and mushrooms were. Mike just grunted in agreement. "Don't you worry, Sarah. We'll find you a job too, and a husband." Sarah laughed. "Oh, come on. Why would I need a husband? I'd rather be single." "Why? That's how it's meant to be. People start families, have kids, live together, and help each other." Sarah waved her off. "Oh, that's maybe one case in 1,000. Most people just split up and abandon their kids." Ruby sighed. "I don't know what happened in your family, but don't think that's the norm. Although you'll understand once you live here a while." And Sarah really did settle in quickly. Within a week, she realized she could relax a bit, that in this small town she didn't need to expect trickery from everyone. Here, people say what they think. Sometimes it sounds a bit rude, but at least you know no one is being deceptive. She got a job as a nanny at a daycare center. The pay was low, but Sarah hardly spent any, since as soon as the townspeople learned she was from an orphanage, they brought her all sorts of things. At first, Sarah tried refusing, but people were genuinely offended. They were just being kind-hearted. And over time, They constantly tried to feed her or treat her to things. Just yesterday, she was walking home from work when Old Man Walter called out to her, "Sarah, off from work." "Yes, Mr. Walter." "Come by the house for a minute, won't you? The missus is waiting." Sarah sighed and headed for the gate where Walter's wife was waiting. "Here, Sarah, the cucumbers and tomatoes really did well this year. Take these, and if you can't eat them all, can them for winter. You know how good pickles are in the wintertime." Mrs. Walter noticed Sarah's horrified look at the 2 buckets full of vegetables. "Don't you worry now, dear. Walter will help you carry them." In the 2 months Sarah had lived in the small town, she had learned a lot. First, she, Ruby, and Anna had planted her whole vegetable garden after Mike tilled it with his tractor. Then she learned how to water, weed, and even tried some of the produce from her own little plot. She learned not to wake up when Ruby's crazy rooster flew over to her fence right under her bedroom window, crowing his songs. The next day was Sarah's day off, and she decided to spend the whole evening canning vegetables. The old lady was right. Everything would be useful in the winter. In the evening, Anna stopped by. "Mom sent you some mushrooms." "Oh, are the mushrooms out already?" Anna chuckled. "Of course they are. There's a huge forest right behind your garden. If you go, don't wander too far. It goes on forever." Early the next morning, Sarah took a basket she had found in the attic and headed for the woods. Her mood was wonderful. She had never picked mushrooms before, though she knew how it was done. The scenery was indescribably beautiful. Low-lying fog in the hollows, the sun rising behind the trees. Sarah could barely contain her delight, silently thanking once again the bureaucrats who had economized on her housing situation. And despite being short on sleep since vehicles had raced up and down the roads all night in their little town, she didn't regret getting up so early. She found the first mushroom right at the edge of the woods and immediately understood a mushroom hunter's thrill. Within 2 hours, her basket was full of small, firm, white mushrooms. Sarah looked around regretfully. There was so much more out there. Over by those bushes was a little marsh with last year's lingonberries. She set her basket down under a large, distinctive oak tree, covering it with burdock leaves. Then she took off her kerchief, fashioned it into a little bag, and went to pick the lingonberries. She lost track of how much time had passed, but her rumbling stomach reminded her it was time to head home. The sun was starting to set. Had she really been in the woods all day? Sarah straightened up and froze. On the other side of the marsh lay an airplane, badly decayed, likely from World War II, but still an airplane. She looked around. Of course the townspeople knew about it since she hadn't wandered far, so it must be safe. She circled the plane, running her hand along the wing. Strange. Why had no one ever removed it? She climbed up on a rock, trying to peek inside, and suddenly someone sneezed inside. Sarah fell off in shock and fright. "Oh, who's there?" Silence in response. Maybe she would have fled, but the sneeze had sounded distinctly childlike, maybe even an animal. The young woman resolutely stood up, brushed herself off, and climbed back onto the rock. When she finally looked inside, she gasped. A pair of teary, reddened child's eyes stared back at her. "Who are you? What are you doing in there? Here, let me help you out." A little girl, maybe 5 or 6 years old, trustingly reached out her hand. Sarah pulled her out and looked her over. A few scrapes, but no other injuries. "How did you end up here?" The girl sniffled, tried to say something but couldn't at first. Sarah handed her water bottle to the child, who drank greedily before handing the remains back and saying, "I got mad at my dad, then got lost. I wanted to see the plane and fell inside, but I couldn't get out again. I was so scared when it got dark." Sarah gasped. "You spent the whole night there?" She imagined how terrified the child must have felt, and her heart clenched. "Come on, let's go. I live nearby. I'll feed you and then we'll find your dad." "Okay, just tell him not to be mad at me. I didn't mean to get lost." "I'll tell him." Sarah thought she'd tell the father plenty, enough for him to consider whether he was a real parent or just called himself one. Sarah picked up the basket and hurried toward town, holding the girl's hand firmly. The child, evidently recovering from her ordeal, chattered nonstop. Sarah learned her name was Jessica. Her mother was gone, they lived in the city, and her dad was great but worked too much, which really upset Jessica. This time she had asked her dad to take her to a lake to see the swans and then into the woods to listen for the cuckoo bird. But he said he was too busy and she'd have to wait. Jessica adamantly did not want to wait, resulting in her predicament. By the time Jessica finished her story, they had reached Sarah's house. But Jessica suddenly felt drained. She didn't even finish a few spoonfuls of soup before falling asleep. Sarah moved her to the couch, covered her up, and pondered what to do next. The answer was obvious. Go find Aunt Ruby, who surely knew all the local news. At your place? The whole area is in an uproar looking for the poor little girl. Can you imagine? Her father is going out of his mind. Aunt Ruby, could you call wherever you need to, and I'll head back over. Go on, Sarah. She's been through a terrible ordeal, spending that night in the woods. I'll call the station now. Sarah hadn't been home even half an hour before cars pulled up outside. She went to the door to ask them to stay quiet, but she didn't get the chance. A young man burst through in a whirlwind, and upon seeing Sarah cried out, "Jessica, baby!" The little girl opened her eyes and was swept into her father's embrace, bursting into tears. "Daddy, I'm sorry, I was so scared. I'll never ever do that again." The man stroked her hair. "And you forgive me too, okay? We'll definitely go see the swans and listen for the cuckoo." Jessica pulled back. "Can Sarah come with us?" The man looked at Sarah, who felt self-conscious. Of course, if Sarah wants to come. Sarah learned that Jared was some kind of internet genius who could work anywhere for a very high salary, designing games or something like that. Being computer illiterate herself, she didn't really follow his explanations on their walk to the lake a week later, with Jessica running ahead. Finally, the girl stopped. "Dad, geez, you talk to girls about that stuff? Honestly." Jared looked sheepish. "Sorry, Sarah. I don't interact with women much. I forgot what kind of conversations are appropriate." In that moment, all of Sarah's awkwardness dissipated. The rest of the time, they enthusiastically debated why swans have such long necks, what time the sun sets, and whether aliens experience love. Then Jared and Jessica walked Sarah home, where Jared had left his car. They were renting a house for the summer in the next town over. They lingered a long time, with Jessica not wanting to let Sarah go, and Jared holding her hand perhaps a bit too long before they finally drove off. Sarah sighed and stepped towards her house. "Well, I did tell you our little town is nice and in a good location. You'll find everything here, including a husband." Sarah turned to see Ruby smiling at her and laughed. "Oh, come on, Aunt Ruby. Jared's not a boyfriend prospect. We're just hanging out because of Jessica. You're imagining things." Sarah went inside while Ruby sighed and murmured, "No, Sarah, you can't run from your own happiness, no matter how hard you try." And a year later, Sarah and Jared came to town to ask Ruby to be the godmother of their newborn daughter, something little Jessica had expressly requested. How could Ruby refuse such a request from the young family?